Hello, all, and welcome back to a new episode of TV and Us, a conversation show about the TV series we just can't stop talking about. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And each season, we focus on a different show, reviewing it episode by episode, and we invite you to watch along with us. Right now, we are reviewing Severance Season 2, and today we are on Episode 7, titled Chikhai, Bardo. All right, Sarah, do you want to start us off with a summary for Episode 7?
An old romance intersects with a deadly present threat.
Oh, that's such interesting framing.
Right?
Wow. Oh, interesting. An old romance.
Yeah.
Okay, lots to think about there. And how Severance is teeing that up. But let's start off with our episode titles of choice for Episode 7. Sarah, what is yours?
Mine is Ant Farm.
Oh, nice. Yes. Yeah, I mean, there's some meta ways you can interpret Ant Farm too. All the workers in a tiny box being moved around and controlled by the big humans. Powers
absolutely.
that be. My episode title for Episode 7 is Dress Up.
Yes, we do get to see that. We see quite a few outfit changes.
So many thoughts about that. Okay, let's start off with our high-level thoughts about Episode 7. We won't spoil this episode quite yet in this first section. Sarah, what were your thoughts about Episode 7 as a whole? Did this work for you? Did this land for you?
Yeah, this is a really interesting episode of Severance. This is really honestly unlike anything we've seen so far in the show. And I appreciate how visually it's so different than everything else that we've seen. And we get to see a different side of Mark than we've seen too, which is really nice, and get to see, like some happier times in Mark's life. And we get to know more about who Gemma is as a person. We've been hearing about her for so many episodes, for so long. And now we actually get to see her and get a glimpse into who she is. So I think it's really effective in what it does. It looks great. And yeah, it does the classic Severance thing. You get a couple of answers and then you get like 800 more questions. So yeah, just it looks different than what we've seen before, but it is a just classic Severance episode. What about you? What did you think of this one?
I really liked this episode. I really did. I think it's opened up so many more interesting pathways and thoughts to think about. And I think in our Episode 6 review, I was huffing and puffing about how I was like, where is this going? I feel like we're just revisiting the same threads and we're not really making progress. And I think Episode 7 was the direct answer to that for me, because we're exploring so much more of this world, which is really exciting. And some of the behind the scenes, different office functions and departments that we get to see inside of Lumen and what they are doing. We get these little glimpses. We get to experience the testing floor for the first time ever. So there's just a lot of like really great world building of how Lumen is run, which I really loved. But also I think this episode does an incredible job deepening the character stakes and the emotional investment that I think I feel like I have way more of now in let's get these people out of here, let's save them. They need to break free from the system. So it was a great episode to really stoke that feeling of momentum in how I felt invested in their mission. And I hope they continue to deliver on that, because we've got 3 more episodes left. And now I feel like I am on board and we need to get these people out.
Yes, let's rescue everybody. We've known that Lumen is just shady and just not up to good things. And then we get to see so much more of that, and see, because we don't, it brings up so many more questions about what they're doing. And we just know that it's bad. So I am with you. Like, yes, let's rescue these people. Let's get these people out. I also just have a just deep mistrust of this show and all of the questions that I now have and would like to see resolved. I don't trust that they're going to resolve any of them. So I am still maintaining my emotional detachment and trying not to get too invested in any kind of liberation story. Yeah, just because I don't trust the show. So we'll see what happens in these final few episodes.
Because you have watched Severance season 1 and you know that they can play with our emotions and leave us hanging by the end. So, yes. That's wise. That's very wise. Okay. Well, let's give a spoiler here. If you haven't seen Severance episode 7, go in blind. As always, we 10 out of 10 recommend not listening to the rest of our conversation if you haven't seen episode 7 yet. But if you have, let's dive into all of the juicy details that happened in this episode. So, Sarah, what are some big things that stood out to you in this episode? There's lots to choose from.
Yeah, I mean, we finally get a glimpse at who Gemma is. And I think that's really interesting too, because in season 1, we just hear about her and can kind of feel the weight of her absence. And then we realize that Gemma is Miss Casey and in the final episode. And then we still don't learn anything else about her, really.
Yeah.
Until this episode. And so I find that really interesting that such a central force in this show and such a pivotal person in Mark's life that dictated his decision to even start this journey. We know nothing about her other than her absence and what that has caused in him. And so then now finally, all these episodes into the show, so many hours invested into this world, we finally get to meet her. And I appreciate that this episode is pretty much primarily focused on her. And it's so interesting to be able to more fully explore this character that is so important. And I love that the show really gave space and time for that exploration to really happen.
Yeah. It is surprising how little we know about her, but her presence is always felt, especially in season 1, obviously, but I think even ironically, even more so in season 2, because so much of Mark's emotional development is centered on her, and we get so many more flashbacks with her. I was impressed with how quickly and efficiently the show allowed us to really get to know them as a couple and feel invested in them and all of their memories and this whole life that they have built. It felt like watching a artsy-fartsy indie drama, about a family, and the way that we so quickly experience all these vignettes. Sometimes we get to sit in a memory. Sometimes all of the memories are flashing before our eyes very quickly in kind of an anxious pace. And so I thought all of the technical execution components of all of those edited montage sequences of their flashbacks and the way that it kind of created this haze between memory and present was pretty genius, and some really incredible editing and cinematography as well. So the efficiency of that being cut together in such a well done way, I think really helps me feel that emotional investment in what was lost between the two of them and how much that is impacting both of these characters in the present.
Yeah, and I love that we get to see, the Mark from the before times, because we've seen any Mark and outie Mark, and then we've seen any Mark with Helly, and so we've seen these different versions of Mark. We've seen Mark before the macro data refinement uprising, all of that. We've seen him post that. We've seen these different types of Mark over this show, but we have never seen, I would say, happy Mark. And in this episode, we get to see what that looked like. And we get to see kind of almost this like unburdened version of Mark. And that was just fascinating to see. So just like shout out to Adam Scott, who does a great job of, conveying all of those really complex emotions throughout his performance to make this episode feel like such a contrast. Like in the first flashback when we first meet him, I was like, oh my gosh, who is this? Like, who is this version of Mark? He's so different than anything that we have experienced. And so I think the performances and the cinematography do a great job of showing us the difference between what's happening in Lumen and the outside world. Because even in those flashbacks, the color palette looks so different than we've seen of the post Gemma, post Mark's Severance world. Obviously inside Lumen it's a very specific color palette, but even outside of Lumen at Mark's house and in his environment, that also looks different than the world does in these flashbacks. So I think visually it also does a great job of showing us his world was completely different at this time, not only in how he felt and how he was processing, but through those visuals, we can feel so much more warmth than we have experienced in Severance up until now.
Yes, yes. And I feel like as a viewer, I'm like, I too, for these characters they've been starving for this. And I think that's why so many of the moments of connection throughout the season so far between Mark and Helly's, Innie's, and even Dylan and his like meetings with his wife, just they're starved for any sort of human connection. And so to get so much of it in this episode is very Unseverance-like, but I think is also part of the point is that, yeah, the world was so different for him. His life was full and abundant, and it wasn't perfect. Like I like that they showed a lot of montage sequences where they fought and disagreed, but their life was full and they had each other, and that is what he's lost now, and now they're fighting for that again. So I mean, for us as a viewer, I think it's highly effective to get us invested in wanting redemption for this couple because we saw what they had and how beautiful it was. And we're like, okay, she's literally a prisoner inside of this corporation, and he is undergoing a life-threatening surgery to try and like go and save her. Like this, there's a lot happening here, but we are invested now in the mission more so than we were maybe before.
Yeah. I just need all of Mark to be really invested in the mission. Because Audi Mark has been invested in the mission. Innie Mark has not. So we'll see after he recovers what that is going to look like and what the new and improved Mark is going to be.
Yeah. Episode 8 is going to be definitely incredibly juicy. Man, there's lots to discuss with what we learn about Lumen and the far-reaching depths of what they are up to. I thought that there was a fascinating weaving of threads that were previously introduced in season 1 of Severance with the birthing retreat center and the way that the severance procedure was not just used for corporate life and your working life, but also used for kind of this 9-month period and maybe sometimes longer of pregnancy, and the way that we met that one woman through Devin in season 1 who was kind of one of the clients of this process, and it begs some interesting questions for seeing just Mark and Gemma struggle with pregnancy and having to go through all of these very difficult and painful procedures. Like, how was she maybe being courted by Lumen? How is Lumen manipulating and using that area of deep pain for this couple to get her to buy in to whatever thing that she was sold? Like Gemma, obviously from Mark's perspective, we know that Lumen has like somehow faked her death and whatnot, but how much was Gemma also aware that she needed to go away and go do this procedure for the sake of building this family that she so longs for with Mark, and what did Lumen tell her was going to happen? And obviously something very different has happened with her condition and her circumstances now of being literally prisoner inside of Lumen. So it just begs all of these interesting questions of what was Gemma told? What did Lumen sell her? Why did she agree to this? Was she aware? Maybe she wasn't. They really did fake her death. And how does current Gemma now process this situation? Because she's clearly trying to get out of here, but obviously the procedures have been done. And so the systems of control that can keep her here are also incredibly prominent and effective.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just so many questions. Again, like we see a little bit more of Gemma. We get some answers to some of the questions that we had, but now we have so many more questions. We knew that Lumen was far-reaching. We knew that they were like the unethical evil corporation. But now it's like, what are they actually doing? And what are the different departments? How are they all connected? It's just so many more questions about this shady corporation. Yeah, and I love that this episode really highlights though that struggle with like infertility and all of
Yeah.
that like so many people actually deal with in real life. Like it's not an uncommon thing for
Mm-hmm.
people to experience. And so I love that this episode, while focusing on these larger themes about corporate culture and all of these about like our world today, has taken so much of this episode to really highlight that struggle and show the lengths and the difficulties that people will go to in order to fulfill this dream and desire of theirs. And to spend as much time on that in this episode, I thought was really notable because they didn't have a lot of time to really like explore Mark and Gemma's history. And like you said, it's just these series of vignettes. And I love that part of their story is so prominent and helps to underline, just the like additional layers of grief that Mark is probably going through as well, and is probably setting up some other things like, okay, like you were asking, like, did Gemma choose this? Was she tricked into it? Like, what is actually like going on here? And seeing kind of maybe the source of pain that would lead someone to put themselves potentially in this situation. Yeah, I thought that was a really important, like vulnerable quality to give to these characters, and just such an important like humanizing thing too that you don't see a lot, even though it affects a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And they did such a honoring job of showcasing the complex emotions that come with it, the emotional roller coaster that comes with it. And like you mentioned, really being able to advocate for this experience that is something that a lot of women go through, and for many, many years has been something that's been a source of shame, and something that a lot of women have felt they need to be more quiet about. But I think in the recent few years, there's been more of willingness to have conversations and share the stories around this that I think has been so healing and valuable for a lot of women, feeling like there's a lot more of these cases out there than previously known, and there's a shared camaraderie and a connection that can form there. But it also suggests how, insidious perhaps the Lumen Corporation is, and also like preying on the very real, raw, vulnerable emotions of people that are experiencing this. I thought it was really fascinating. Maybe coincidence, maybe it means something, but Gemma's room in Lumen that she's prisoner in is the exact same layout as the OBGYN office, I think, waiting room. It's like the chairs are placed in the exact same way. And there's a moment in this episode where there's a quick cut from one to the other to showcase how similarly they are laid out. And so it just also begs the question of how involved and connected is Lumen in with these clinics and these doctors, and is that how they also source prime candidates for their testing and experimentation? Because we've seen from episode 6 and the dinner party with Bert and Fields, that Lumen is very connected in definitely the religious community. So I would not be surprised if they're also connected into the medical community as well, as a way to identify those that are most vulnerable and therefore most prime to buy into whatever thing that Lumen is trying to sell to these people, to give them some hope of redemption or providing something that they feel like they can't have in their outie life and their current life, whether it's to have a child or to receive salvation. Like, Lumen is able to somehow promise for each individual exactly what they're looking for, which is so crazy and insidious.
And I appreciate that in the first season, they talk about Lumen some, and you know that it's very big and it has like far-reaching tentacles and like all of these things. Like, it's not a tiny organization, but we don't really see that. We see little bits of the world expanding. We can see, the lore around Kier and all of that in the first season. But a lot of the focus is the severed floor and the severance procedure. And that's kind of where we hang out. And I appreciate that this season we are expanding the world, and we're seeing, like in the previous episode, we see the intertwining with church. In this, we see, some medical stuff that's going on. And I find that really fascinating, and I'm curious to see the other kind of spheres in this society that Lumen is also involved in, and how they are working kind of behind the scenes to draw people into whatever nefarious thing they're working on.
Yeah, that kind of progression of disclosure and world building is fun for us, because it's interesting looking back now, because there were so many suggestions and seeds planted along the way in season 1, but obviously we had like a gajillion other things to think about in season 1, so we just collected them along the way, and it's fun to see them getting paid off now. Like that whole Devin meeting Mrs. Selvig and being connected with a birthing retreat, little happenstance, just a small throwaway scene in season 1, is now potentially a groundbreaking moment for how Cobell will be integrated into this whole plot line, which you and I have been waiting for to see when Cobell will show up. And at such a time as this, Devin's got her number and is about to call her, and it's this big dramatic final moment of the episode. So it's fun to see the setup and payoffs, and then you just also wonder what is being seeded now that will be paid off later. The goat room, right? Like, how will that come to fruition? Maybe in the season, maybe it won't even come till season 3 or 4. But all of these little moments are so intentionally set up and then interwoven at just the right time. And that's really fun for us as movie and TV show watchers, is just getting to be rewarded for paying attention to all of those little details along the way. And I feel like this episode was the culmination of some of those details that we were previously getting a long time ago.
Yeah. And we do see a goat in this episode as well. It's on the stationery that Gemma is writing thank you cards on. So they're still teasing us with the goats.
Yep.
Keeping it at the forefront of our minds.
What does it mean?
Just for you, Jen. Just for you.
We also see those cards that Gemma was looking at in the mail from the clinic. That is the card that Dylan stole in season 1. So that's a fun little connection point too.
It's all connected. We don't know what it means. Man. We don't know why it's connected, but we know it's all connected.
Of course it is. One of the other, I think, interesting world building rule expansion aspect of episode 7 is the suggestion that your mind is not necessarily just severed in two halves, but the question of how many times really can your mind be severed and subdivided is an interesting thing that clearly Lumen is experimenting with, because we see that there's what we'll call Audi Gemma that's imprisoned in Lumen, which is her state when she is not in any of the rooms and she's just living her life in that prison cell. And then we see that there's Miss Casey, which is another version of herself. And then there's also all of the versions of her that are activated when she enters the different rooms. And so maybe there's 3 versions of her mind that have been severed, but maybe there's even like 20 versions, like one for each room that Lumen is able to activate as she enters the different rooms. And we don't know the details of that technology yet, but it does expand our understanding of what the rules are about the severance procedure, because we've to date seen primarily like to have 2 selves version of severance, but clearly there's many different subdivisions and kind of a larger set of prisms that can happen as well.
Yeah, there's just so many questions about this severed procedure. And, in what was it? Episode 4, we learned about the glass globe block. And so that's also a thing that exists that allows you to, I guess, bypass whatever mechanism takes you from your outie to your innie. I don't know, man. I don't know how any of this works. It doesn't make sense. And so now we learn that there's even more complexity to it. And I find that to be really fascinating. I also thought it was interesting that when Gemma tries to make her escape, that it's Milchek that has to presumably rush there because he was kind of out of breath as he was talking to her. Yeah. And he was dressed in his leather jacket instead of his normal suit. So somehow his floor, he was warned that she was coming and had to like rush to try and stop her from trying to escape. So I find that really interesting too, because there's obviously so much more than meets the eye. And we see more of their like surveillance and tracking mechanisms in this episode too. So even though Lumen has kind of promised some level of autonomy for the severed workers, it's clear that that is not something that exists. And so that's another interesting piece of this is they think that they're kind of free to move about. They have these hall passes, they're doing stuff, but Lumen knows what's going on, and there are people that are tracking them. And what that will come to, we don't know. So I again, this episode just creates so many more questions about what is actually going on and the mechanisms of Lumen and the severed procedure and all of that, like just so many additional questions.
Yeah. I thought that room where Drummond is kind of reigning and managing is really fascinating. There's each of the workers that are at those 4 computers that are is seeing essentially the POV shot of what the computers are seeing that are in the actual severed floor. Are all of those workers look like a knockoff version of the persons that they're looking at, which is really interesting. There's like a fake Kelly with like red hair. There's like someone that looks like Dylan but is not actually Dylan. So that's really interesting. And then there's clearly like a shot of Mark with Miss Casey / Gemma behind him. And so it just begs the question too of like Mark being brought into all of this almost as a way for Lumen to test the effectiveness of the severance procedure by putting his literal wife, outie wife, in front of him, creating all of these intense emotions that could puncture the severance wall inside of his brain. And then, or for Miss Casey too, realizing who Mark is. I thought it was so fascinating when Milchek comes to say, like, hey, you need to turn around and go back down the elevator. She asks, where's? And then she's cut off. And I'm like, does she know about Mark? Does she know about the significance of Mark somehow? Has Miss Casey had a feeling of connection to Mark S. the innie in some way? And that's why she's on the testing floor, because her severance procedure is maybe not as strong or enduring as Lumen is expecting, and then they don't want to blow their cover. So I thought that detail of her asking where's and then getting cut off was also really fun and interesting too. So there's just there's, like you mentioned, a million more questions now, and all of these really cool details for us to like construct in our minds what it could all mean.
I'm also curious because she's Gemma on this lower floor. She comes up to the severed floor and she's Miss Casey. If
Yeah.
she was able to get out of the severed floor and get to that elevator that the severed workers come down on, and she was able to actually like get in and then go up, would she come out again as Gemma? Like, how does this work? I'm so intrigued by the severance procedure because it's not it is not as simple as we once believed, and they're clearly doing additional tests and things around how well it holds up and like how it works. So I don't know, man. I hope that we learn a little bit more about what that is and how it works, and I don't know, like what actually happens to the brain when
Mm.
you undergo all that she's currently going through, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 And then all of those rooms, like what are they used for? There seems to be such a like wide range of types of experiences and emotions that are happening in each of those rooms, from the dentist to a plane crash, to the horror of writing like 200 thank you notes from Christmas. It's all, I don't know if it's like the intensity of emotion is meant to be ignited and stimulated in some way to see how that severance procedure holds up and maybe can puncture the thin walls of the severance procedure and the subdivisions within her brain somehow. But the choice of all of those vignettes that are set up in all those rooms is really interesting to think about as well.
Can
What does it all
I
mean?
Right? Like, what does it all mean? So there's a little detail in the Christmas card writing scene is
Mm-hmm.
she's writing with her left hand all of those
Mm,
notes, but in the flashbacks and as Miss Casey, she's right-handed. And
mm,
so that was just interesting to me of like, why? Why is she left-handed here? Why is she writing with her left hand in this one scene when we haven't seen her write with her left hand anywhere else in the show? I don't
yeah.
know, but there's like multiple shots of her writing with her left hand there. And so that was
Mm-hmm.
just something that was intriguing to me. I don't know why. We may never know why, but I was perplexed.
Yeah, yeah. The right hand, left hand dominance does not seem to hold over the course of the seven procedure. So, you know what? In that way, highly effective. The dominant hand has switched in her severed brain. I thought it was also interesting the Christmas sequence that the Christmas tree in that room looks nearly identical to the Christmas tree in the flashback sequence of Mark and Gemma's home. And it's like decorated similarly. It's got the same visual look and feel, and it's almost like identical size too. So I wonder if some of those rooms were also meant to take memories from Gemma's actual past and almost recreate them to see if they would also like trigger the access to Gemma's brain and memories, because there's these things that are similar. So I don't know.
And even in that Christmas card scene, he says, "I love you," and she doesn't answer. And so then like he prompts her for a response. And then we see later with
Mm,
Mark and Gemma a very similar conversation that happens. So that probably holds of them trying to like test these different scenarios to see how severance works, but it also begs the question of how did they know that that conversation happened? I mean, it's not like the most
yeah.
unique conversation in the world, but also it's just so prominent. So again, we don't know how far reaching Lumen's little tentacles go, but that was
Mm,
kind of like eerie and creepy to see the severed version of that conversation and then to see that
mm.
conversation happen in real life. Ugh, it's creepy.
Yeah. Yeah. Just how much do they see? Because I like that we don't know. Like, we don't get the like backroom shots of what they're seeing all the time, but we know that they see all, apparently. So that's really fun. I love that we don't get to know. We just get to wonder and find it very terrifying. Other big things that stand out to you? I mean, there's so many, but
I mean, now Mark is awake.
yeah. Yep.
Okay.
He did not die. That's great. Very
Yeah,
good.
at least for now. I don't know. We don't know what will happen to him. People messing
Yeah.
around in his brain. Wow. Now Mark is awake. Devin is there, and now Devin is in charge of his health care, and we don't know what's going to
Poor
happen.
woman.
Hopefully a Harmony appearance.
I was so excited to see that she almost calls Cobell. Notable that Ragavi too is like, if you call her, like, I'm literally out. I'm taking all my stuff. Even though for Ragabi, like, Mark is essential for her too to help take this whole Lumen thing down, and it was worth it enough for her to like walk away as her one chip that she could play to ensure that Devin doesn't call Cobell. And interestingly too, the way that Ragabi uses the words she was raised by Lumen, I think is the way that she described it. So just how much, obviously we know that Cobell has a ton of loyalty to Lumen and Kier, but seemingly like they go way back, even maybe to the point where Cobell is raised in this cult in some way, or from a young age. Just how far reaching that influence from Lumen is, Ragapi seems to have an understanding of. So that was another fun little detail to add to our pocket and kind of confirm something we already knew, but maybe even intensify what we already knew.
I have so many questions still about Ragabi. Like, I like her. I'm here for this. I'm like, yes, ma'am. Let's be this like covert, like trying to get people out of Lumen. Like, I'm here for it. But also, how do you know so much? How do you know all that you know about Lumen? I
Right?
don't I don't understand. But I think what is interesting in that exchange that she has with Devin is that Ragabi doesn't have the most up-to-date information, because she still thought that
Mm,
Cobell worked there, and
mm,
Devin sets her straight. And so I think that is an interesting piece as well. So Ragabi knows a lot, but she's not on the inside currently. She's not getting current information. At least that's how I read it.
mm,
I don't know. I want to know more. How does she know all that she knows? I mean,
mm-hmm.
I trust her, but I shouldn't probably. So I don't know. I want to learn more about her. I hope she shows back up.
Well, and then there's the fun, just like if those two can join up together, like they're both so sharp and strategic, and they could do so much if they joined forces, but what are their competing loyalties and like their different emotional alignments and different goals, like all of that. So yeah, I hope that they join forces together. I think that'd be great. And then also another complex factor is that it seems like the show is suggesting that Rickon is somehow working for Lumen in some way, or partnering with them, or aligned to them. And so Devin being married to Rickon also throws a whole wrench into all of their goals. So I love that all of our game pieces on the board all have different goals, different loyalties, different desires and objectives, and they're all going to collide with each other somehow.
Yeah, Rickon and his propaganda book for
Oh,
Lumen. Yes.
so upset. Yeah. Yeah. The other interesting factor that I was thinking about after the episode is Audi Irv. Like, why did Audi Irv have such intense vision of the testing floor elevator hallway and like painted all of those paintings of it and had this like fixation with it? Like, what does Audi Irv know? Is he reintegrated or not? Can we have him join forces and also link up with Devin and Ragabi, please? And like form a little Audi crew to work with the innies to take them out? Like there's something there too for why there was all of those scenes showcasing Audi Irv seeing and being fixated on the testing floor so many times. Like, was his innie also subject to multiple Severance subdivisions and also having to go to the testing floor so many times to the point where that's kind of seared into his memory and it kind of trickled into his Audi version's memory too.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's interesting kind of seeing the little bits that like bleed through from the innie self to the outie self. And so that's probably why they're having someone like Gemma test all of these things to understand, like, oh, okay, you go to the dentist and he does a procedure or whatever, and then you come out and your tooth hurts. Okay, that makes sense. There's some lingering pain, like physical pain that your body has endured. Or, you write 1,000 Christmas cards and your hand is going to hurt afterwards, things like that. So yeah, they're clearly having to test these limits as I do wonder if, like, as the severed floor and the workers there are pushing these boundaries, if they're having to like up some of their like testing and things like that, just because the severed workers are, at least these severed workers, the few that we are following, are trying to like push the boundaries. So is that causing Lumen to have to, I don't know, ramp up their own testing? I don't know.
Yeah.
We may never know.
We may never know, but we're collecting all kinds of interesting information, and that's exciting. Cold Harbor is a room aligned to a file, which is also aligned to an initiative. All of that's interesting. Yeah.
So can I share my thought about Cold Harbor?
Yes, please.
Which is probably wrong, but my first thought was, is Cold Harbor the morgue? Like, which is a very morbid thought, but like, those are kept really cold, and it's just a temporary place that you go before you are either cremated or buried. I don't know. It could be a like poetic name for a morgue, which would be really dark, and it would be really mean of the show for that to be where Gemma's gonna go next. Like, she does all of this testing and then she is killed essentially and goes to the morgue. Like, that would be upsetting.
That they're setting that up because Drummond at one point is like, enjoy this while it lasts because we're gonna get rid of her soon.
Right?
And I was like, oh my God, we now have a time crunch, guys. We need to move faster, everybody. Like, we want to get her out. Like, she's nearing the end of her testing period, and they're just going to be like, and thank you for your services and goodbye, So that little detail is great too. So you know what? Could be more, really. They got to get rid of her somehow, and they need a place for it to go. Oh, man.
That was my thought. That's my really morbid thought for this episode.
Well, I am so pleased that the final episode of this season, episode 10, is titled Cold Harbor. So perhaps we will find out.
Perhaps. Yes. Unless it's a bait and switch, which would be mean.
That would be genius.
Yeah.
Here's the big question that you've been asking this whole season. What is Cold Harbor? And we're going to name the last episode that, but we will not talk about Cold Harbor and mention it anyway. You don't figure it out. Or you know what? It's going to be like a shot of her entering the room and then hard cut and credits roll, because we've seen them do that before, haven't we?
I would be so mad. I would be upset.
Well, it's not like they've never done it before, so wouldn't put it past them.
This is true. This is the unfortunate part of now watching this week to week, because I didn't watch season 1 when everybody else did. I watched it when we reviewed this a couple months ago. So I only had to wait a couple of months.
Yes. Exactly. With the knowledge and hope that in 2 months you would get answers to your questions and revisit this world.
Yeah.
Nope. You're with the rest of us now.
Now I have to wait. With everybody else. This is upsetting.
Yep. Yeah. But you know what? We need a healthy dose of what you shared at the beginning of the episode, which is we cannot trust the show. We must remain emotionally detached because, man, after this one, I'm like, oh, we got to save her. All right, let's give out some awards, shall we? Okay. So the first award category is for Employee of the Week. What is your choice?
I gotta give it to Gemma for her attempted prison break.
Why? I have listed here the Gemma jailbreak.
Yes.
Our brains are aligned today.
Amazing.
Yeah. It was so great. I was on the edge of my seat. And then it was genius for the show to literally use her severed self that is so obedient and compliant and doesn't know what's happening to get her to go back. Oh, it's heartbreaking when she goes down the elevator again and is greeted by the woman.
Yeah.
Like, that is not the face that I want to see when I know that my prison break has failed. I want to see your face. Okay, the next category is Move the Needle Moment. What is your choice?
Ragabi bolting when Devin tries to call Harmony.
Yeah, she gets out of there so fast. She collects all of her good
dips.
All of her things.
Wow. And there isn't even a okay, just kidding. I'm putting my phone away. I won't call. There's none of that. Ragabi is you thought you had it in your head to call Harmony? I'm out. I'm done. I was like, oh, okay. That's a good, clear boundary. Excellent.
Yeah, no negotiation. That's good. That's good. My choice for this is all the flashback moments. We see so many sides of Mark, and we learned so much about Gemma. All of them were so interesting to understand these two humans and these two characters that we've been following for so long. So just got such a peek into their lives, which was pivotal for the character building.
It's a good choice.
Yeah. Okay. Achievement and corporatees. What is your choice?
Yeah, I want to give this to Dr. Maurer, who says, Mark will benefit from the world you're siring.
Yeah, that was one of my candidates. That's a good one. There's some great options in this one. My choice is also from him when he says to Gemma, "Good night, Gemma. Dream sweet."
Yes.
And I love that she's like, "Can you please talk like a normal person?"
The exact question that we are also asking.
Sweet. Yeah, so good.
Can I also give a shout out to a Rickon quote that I loved?
Yes, please.
In one of the flashback, and they're talking about climbing a mountain or whatever, he says, "Outdoorsmanship courses through my veins."
Oh my gosh. It's very good.
It's okay, you go, Rickon.
He gets on my nerves. That's a great one, though.
He's so annoying, but it's so funny.
Yeah, he's the fact of the show.
It's fact.
That's a good one. Outdoorsmanship courses through my veins. One of my other candidates, I'll just share one more. It's also from Dr. Maurer. He goes, "You will see the world again and the world will see you." I'm just like, what does this mean? What are we saying? It sounds really nice, but what does that even mean?
No one knows. And that is the point.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so good. So good. All right. Well, this is our review and discussion of episode 7. You can find it available on Apple TV+. Thank you for listening to today's episode of TV and Us. Our name sums it up. We're big fans of TV and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today as we continue our journey through Severance Season 2. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about episode 7. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at tvnspod, or email us at tvnspod@gmail.com. We have another show called Movies and Us, where we discuss and talk about movies in the film industry. And the Oscars are very, very soon. And so we are going to be reacting to all of the Oscar wins and snubs. It's always a really fun episode. We also have an Oscar wager, which is a fun tradition we have over on Movies and Us. So check out that episode. It's coming out very soon as we wrap up this year's awards season. So go check it out. All right. Well, here back on TVNS, we will be back very soon to discuss episode 8. Lots gonna happen. Mark is fully reintegrated. We're gonna find out more about what happens next. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again with y'all very soon.